The Death Toll precon is one of the most interesting precons that I have ever seen, and by the end of this video I'm going to teach you all how to play this commander deck. And let me tell you something, that this is a deck that is uniquely its own, and it would be hard for me to say that I would have ever imagined that a precon would do what this precon does. Let's go over our commander. Our commander is Winter, Cynical, Opportunist, and he reads, whenever Winter attacks, mill 3 cards. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. If you do, put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it, which means if that card was to die or go back to the graveyard, it would be exiled instead. When you're playing this commander deck, you need to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to get Winter onto the battlefield as quickly as possible, so that you can start attacking and you can begin to mill cards. Every time he attacks, you mill 3. And as you can see, here are just 12 of the 20 cards that we have inside this deck that force yourself to mill. And forcing yourself to mill is incredibly important inside this deck because it's what fuels the deck's win condition. The win condition to this deck is extremely oppressive, and when you time it correctly, you can put your opponents in a position where they are unable to play the game. This precon is a tempo, grindy, mid to late game, self-mill, reanimator deck that excels in its ability to apply resilient pressure to your opponents. Listen, I would have never imagined that I could ever have described the precon to be this specific playstyle, but look, allow me to explain. Now let's just imagine I have a ton of cards in my graveyard. It's turn 5 or 6, and my opponents ended up wiping the board because there were too many creatures in play. After they wipe the board, they play a creature, and then they pass the turn to me. It goes to my turn, and then I cast a Vile Mutilator, which means that they're gonna have to sacrifice a non-token creature and enchantment, but most importantly the creature. So this will enter the battlefield, and this will represent 6 damage. I'll then pass a turn to my opponent, in which they take their turn. Let's just imagine they have removal, and they remove this Vile Mutilator, replaying whatever card they wanted to play and put a creature onto the battlefield. In which it goes back to my turn, in which I can play Winter, and then I can probably cast another spell, and then pass a turn, and as I pass the turn, I can have the Vile Mutilator re-enter the battlefield because of Winter's ability. He will re-enter, and then my opponent will be forced to sacrifice another creature. So now as my opponent goes to play, they play cards out of their hand, but because they had used their removal earlier, they have no more removal to deal with the cards that I've put onto the board. So I will go back to my turn, in which I can then cast another spell that's gonna destroy another creature my opponent controls. That will enter the battlefield and do exactly what I said, and then as I pass the turn, I can get another creature from my graveyard from Winter, and I'll grab this giant Ataphage, and then that will enter the battlefield. So what you're noticing here is that as my opponents are casting spells, I have the ability to remove them. My opponents can then spend their turn removing my cards, but then I can just replay those cards again. And a lot of them have the same ability. There are 13 cards inside this deck that destroy my opponent's creatures. So the idea is that we need to wait for a time when we are playing this deck to where the game is reset. And then because we have a ton of cards inside our graveyard, we essentially have a giant hand, which means that because we have a giant hand in our graveyard, we're able to consistently play more cards than my opponents every turn. I mean, we're dropping cards that cost 7 mana value, 6 mana value, but this is happening twice every single turn. And each of these cards have pretty devastating effects on the game, specifically these two and all the other ones that are inside the deck that destroy your opponent's creatures, whether it's these two or the planeswalkers that we have that destroy our opponent's creatures as well. Remembering that Winter lets us bring back permanence from our graveyard to the battlefield. So we are consistently putting cards into play that are not allowing our opponents to play the game, which puts us in a position where, like I mentioned earlier about this being a tempo grindy deck, once You have this established, a pile of cards that have been milled. You can put your opponent in a position where they cannot rebuild their board state while your board state is growing larger and larger. When playing this deck, you have to be patient because starting the game, you're going to have 0 cards in your graveyard and everybody's going to have the same number of permanents on the battlefield. While you're playing this deck, you may feel tempted to activate Winter's ability and start putting permanents onto the battlefield. Remember, Winter's ability is a May ability, which means that you don't have to activate Winter. What you want to do is just slowly build up the number of cards that you have inside your graveyard. Look, I have enough cards here to exile for me to put a Death Reap ritual into play. But over the course of what I have set up on the battlefield right now, this is not really gonna affect the game in any way. It would be much better for me to have a ton of cards in my graveyard, because remember, you have to exile a ton of cards in order for you to put the permanents onto the battlefield. And the thing is that if we get to the state that I demonstrated earlier, where I was showing how we were destroying something, getting a creature, and then getting a creature back. I was destroying something, playing a creature, and then getting a creature out of the graveyard. If it gets to a point where I'm not able to continue this, where if my opponent then wipes the board while I'm doing this, and I can't just replay Winter and start the process all over again, the deck will then stall out. And that tempo pressure that I talked about earlier will sizzle. So you need to make sure that when you are activating this ability, you have the tempo advantage. You have the ability to play. In other words, for new players, you're playing more cards than your opponent is playing because you're constantly destroying your opponent's cards with the cards that you're playing. And as long as you can do that, I don't care what deck you're playing against or who you're playing against or what's going on. If you can play more cards than your opponent, they can't defend themselves and you're most likely going to win the game. Now, I rarely do suggestions for upgrades inside these videos, but I think the combo that I'm about to talk to you guys about is so strong and that I need new players to know this because it is devastating, this combo that I'm about to go over. And dude, you will literally be spending no less than $3, maybe $5 to assemble this combo. So the cards that we're gonna talk about are Carrion Feeder, we're gonna talk about Overseer of the Damned, and we're gonna talk about the Butcher of Malakir. Now, each of these cards are technically permanents, which means that as or if these cards are destroyed, you can always bring them back with Winter, which I think is devastating. And this combo is interchangeable with artifacts and enchantments. And because Winter allows you to bring back permanents, you can bring back these artifacts and enchantments as well. Now, back to the original cards. What will happen is, imagine we have the Carrion Feeder in play, and then we cast an Overseer of the Damned. An Overseer says that when it enters the battlefield, you're going to destroy a target creature. This also reads, whenever a non-token creature dies, we're going to create a 2/2 zombie token that's tapped. What we can do, as long as we have the Butcher of Malakir in play, I can sacrifice that 2/2 zombie to the Carrion Feeder to then put a counter on the Carrion Feeder, making it stronger. But more importantly, the Butcher of Malakir sees the zombie die, which means that whenever a creature we control is put into a graveyard or is sacrificed, each of our opponents is going to have to sacrifice a creature, which means that because our opponents are sacrificing their creatures, our Overseer is going to see their creatures die, which means for each creature our opponents control, we're going to create another zombie. So imagine we get 3 more zombies, which means that I can sacrifice one of those zombies, which means that's going to trigger the Butcher of Malakir, which means my opponents are going to have to sacrifice another creature, and if they sacrifice 3 creatures total, we create 3 more zombies. And we can continuously do this until our opponents have no creatures left on the battlefield. Dude, we could even pass the turn. Our opponents can then play a creature, and then in response to them playing that creature, we could sacrifice it to the Carrion Feeder, forcing them to sacrifice a creature they just played. we are essentially locking our opponents out from being able to play the game. And the thing is that because we have winter, even if they have removal to destroy this, we can just reassemble it. And it doesn't even matter whether we assemble the combo with creatures or artifacts or enchantments. Now, in key number 5 that I always recommend is that you play test the commander deck, which means that you're shuffling the deck up, you're putting the deck on the table, and you're imagining that you're playing against opponents. If you do this enough, you'll be able to see the different combos and strategies that I went over in this video, so that when you decide to go play at your FNM or against your friends, you'll have much more of a chance to succeed and win games because you've practiced with the knowledge that I gave to you in this video. And if you would like an even bigger test, I'm inviting all of my subscribers to become a part of this channel's 1v1 tournament series, the OG Cup. I don't care whether you're from Canada, England, Brazil, or Germany. I'm inviting all of you to play against me and my friends on this channel in our tournaments, where we battle through spell table to see which commanders are the most powerful commanders in this format. So if you want the opportunity to play and compete inside our tournament, you can join the Discord in the description below. Keep in mind, videos like this exist for all of the precons, so you can click on the channel and find all the content that you're looking for. And if you have any questions or like an upgrade guide for any of these precons, let me know in the comments below, okay? Always remember, eat healthy, all right? Work out every single day. Most importantly, you guys gotta remember to believe in yourself, all right? Peace out, people. Everyone that's a part of this community is inviting all the subscribers on this YouTube channel to compete in this channel's tournament series, the OG Cup.
Another day, another victory for the OG.
Our 1v1 EDH tournament series is now going to be held on Spell Table and broadcast live on this YouTube channel via the Discord. So if you would like to represent your country and become known around the world as an OG Cup champion, you can join the Discord in the link below and test your skills against some of the amazing players we have in this community.